How can there be so many Drizzt books? There's no way there's this many Drizzt books. This isn't even most of the Drizzt books. There's still so many Drizzt books. How can there be so many Drizzt books? Who makes these books? Who writes books exclusively about Drizzt? And why do people want me to compare
Enter
them?
Proper Bird, once a teller of stories, now request after request for comparisons to a white-haired swordsman. She'll learn soon enough that with successful videos comes a price in the Twilight Zone. Hey everyone, it's the Bird here to tell you another story. Today we're talking about the Twilight Zone, and even if you've never watched a single episode of this series, you've likely heard about it before at the very least. When I asked my Twitter friends about the Twilight Zone and what the first thing that came to mind for them was when I mentioned it, a lot of them had very varying answers. Some thought mystery, others thought the theme song, specific actors or specific episodes even. Time with the family is on the list as well. The themes are very varied when it comes to the Twilight Zone, and that's not a mistake. A world of mystery, magic, and contraptions. The Twilight Zone has a little bit for everybody. But the Twilight Zone wasn't made just once. No, it was made a total of 4 times, at least as of now. So today, let me tell you a story about stories.
The Twilight Zone started airing in 1959, as written by Rod Serling. An interesting sort of fellow who really didn't like it when television and radio stations tried to censor his work, which they'd often do. He was never allowed to ask the hard-hitting questions, can't upset the viewers after all, and as he didn't exactly have the pull in his early career to write whatever he wanted, coasting on his name alone, he had to play it rather safe. That is, until 1955. At the time, Serling was a writer for the Kraft Television Theatre. One fateful night, a 70-second script written by Serling was aired that Serling didn't think too much of. In fact, he didn't even watch the show. He'd gone out with his wife and hired a babysitter whom he told wouldn't have to expect too many phone calls. After all, they had only just moved to this town. Unfortunately for said babysitter, the phone would not stop ringing all night as the episode aired. The episode in question, Patterns, would be Serling's ticket to his very own shows. For the moment, he sold off all his earlier work as scripts. Scripts that weren't nearly of the quality Patterns had shown. So, to balance the scales again, Serling wrote Requiem for a Heavy Weight, putting him back on the map. This is where his major fights with sponsors started. Sponsors censored a lot of his early work, anything not to upset the consumer lest they consume less. One of his stories, Noon on Doomsday, was inspired by the racism leading to the murder of Emmett Till. When Serling made mention of that, however, the episode was immediately censored and changed quite significantly, and this kept happening over and over and over again. Serling was simply not allowed to talk about heavy-hitting topics like racism, until he'd had enough. The only way he was going to be able to write the scripts he truly wanted to write was to create his very own show.
So he wrote a pilot for the Twilight Zone, which CBS promptly took and gave to a different show. Except the pilot was so successful that they couldn't rightly not give Serling his very own show, and we all know how that turned out. The Twilight Zone became wildly popular, and Serling was finally able to do all the things he was never able to do before. He could talk about racism, he could talk about war, any sensitive topics that he would have to tiptoe around before, he could now put in his very own show. And for some reason that also included a whole lot of aliens, who all flew the very same model flying saucer with a thrusting system at the bottom of the flying circular saucer. Yeah, very aerodynamic, I know.
And I mean really a lot of aliens. Or just space travel in general, honestly. The original 1959 Twilight Zone series lasted a whole 5 seasons. That's quite a lot of episodes. You're bound to run into some running themes eventually. On a loose count, I found roughly 22 episodes on space travel and aliens. 20 about changing one's fate, 15 about time travel, 13 about the fear of death, and I could go on and on. Why is that significant, you might ask? Well, watching every single Twilight Zone episode in quick succession, it becomes relatively clear that each new series had their own sort of themes to draw on, that being, of course, the times they were written in. In 1959, the whole world was still reeling from the war. Not a world war, but the Vietnam War specifically. That was happening throughout the entirety of the original Twilight Zone series, and it was pretty clear whose side Serling was on. That is, he didn't like war. He thought war was pointless and cruel, and it had far too many victims on both sides. Not to mention outside of the battlefield. That's especially apparent during certain episodes where the American Civil War is brought up. In The Passers-By, we follow a young lady sitting in a near-destroyed house who watches the men come home from the war. This is the South, so they lost, of course, and she laments the loss of life and whether the other side ever thought of that. She laments all this to one of the men who stopped at her house for a drink of water. Except, we eventually find out that every single man who walks that road had died during the war. Not just Southerners, but Northerners too. Eventually, the last man on that road, the last victim of the war, was Abraham Lincoln. The woman at the house? Yeah, she was dead too. Serling tries to make the victims on either side look more human, when then and now it's generally easier to look at the countries at war as them, as evil. They never are, it just makes the killing easier. In general, Serling was a very stand-up guy, at least as far as I could tell from the numerous interviews I've watched of him. Take, for example, this particular interview where he once again insists that racism is a problem, and really he doesn't seem to care overly much that it makes the other guests uncomfortable.
Purpose, the point of a dramatic show, which is used as a vehicle of social criticism, is to involve an audience, to show them wherein their guilt lies, or at least indeed their association. But when you're talking about a bunch of cavalrymen knocking off a bunch of poor redskins and putting them into a reservation, the audience need to have no association, certainly no guilt. How many Indians have they pushed into a reservation? But if indeed you talk about a denial of a man putting his garbage can next to yours, whether he's fought in Vietnam or wherever, by virtue of his color, now you're getting into a universal guilt, which they should feel, or at least in part understand.
In any given Twilight Zone episode, there was usually a moral of some sort, something to learn by the end of the episode. And during the time of war, that was usually war bad, stop doing war. But they weren't all so deep or heavy. Some of them were very lighthearted. There's a lot of episodes that just had what-ifs as well, such as, what if I was immortal? Or, what if I had a genie with 3 wishes? What would you do for that? And all of these episodes would also just go the route of holding a mirror up to your own face and asking you, what would you really do in this situation? Would you do the right thing? Would you be a good person? The answer wasn't always what you'd like it to be.
The immortality question is asked several times throughout the show's lifetime, twice in season 1 even. Escape Clause follows a man who makes a deal with the devil and gains both immortality and invulnerability. The devil notes that, should he ever want to die, he can use his escape clause by just letting Satan know he wants to die. The man is an idiot, of course, if making a deal with the devil wasn't enough of a giveaway. He gets so bored with never hurting, the lack of risks, that he tries everything to get some sort of thrill. So, he kills his wife, of course, so he can try out the electric chair. Except he gets life in prison instead. The guards laugh and say it won't be that long, but they don't know he's immortal. It's only been about 2 weeks or so, and he already uses his escape clause. The second episode is Long Live Walter Jameson, where a man just never grows old. Except, again, the guy's an idiot, and he keeps marrying new, younger women, until one day, one of his old wives finds him and shoots him, because of course that was going to happen eventually. Quite a few of the what-if stories really do have plot holes, of course, but the Twilight Zone does require a certain suspension of disbelief. After all, it's the Twilight Zone. Just pretend that in the Twilight Zone certain people are incredibly dumb and sometimes incredibly evil, or whatever else the story requires to tell you its morals. Even though sometimes that's particularly hard when you're watching an older episode that just has the funniest visuals.
Hey! Where are you? Oh, dear. Terribly sorry. If he hits me, I'll die.
You with us, Lieutenant?
Governor, thank you very much. See you again.
I'm right. You will.
But no doubt you also want to know how the new ones, the remakes, hold up to the original Twilight Zone. For me, I didn't even know that the 1985 one that I grew up with wasn't the original until I looked it up for this video. I actually had no idea. I thought the 1959 one sort of just blended together with the 1985 one. I thought they were made at the same time and they just suddenly realized what color TV was, I guess. Listen, I was a kid, so I didn't know that much, but there's roughly 144 hours of Twilight Zone episodes to watch. Technically, there's also a movie, but the movie wasn't really Twilight Zone. They dug up the script from Rod Serling somewhere on his attic that he never published, so I'm gonna scrap that one.
Next, you might be wondering if there are any episodes that were copied one-on-one. In fact, my own next thought upon realizing that there were multiple Twilight Zone versions was that they must have just picked their favorites from the 1959 series so they could remake it with a modern touch. Not so, actually. There are very few episodes in the newer shows that are straight copies. Even funnier, there's only really a single one that is point by point a copy. Eye of the Beholder. It's an episode about a woman, her head wrapped in bandages. She's pleading with the doctors to make her not ugly anymore. She doesn't want to be beautiful, she just wants people not to scream when they see her. We never see anyone's face in the episode until the very end, when the bandages are taken off and it's revealed that by our standards, the woman is very beautiful and everyone else looks horrible. The beautiful woman is then sent off to live with those of her own kind. Segregation being a theme here, as well as government overreach, who decides who is and isn't beautiful. Beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. Who is the government, or anyone else for that matter, to decide whether or not you're beautiful? Both the 1959 and the 2002 version do the exact same thing. The 2002 version doesn't change a thing, really, apart from some minor details. Likely because during 2002, this topic was still very much a big deal. Not so for the Dead Man's Shoes episode. In the 1959 episode, a homeless man finds a dead gangster's shoes, still on the corpse, and decides to wear them. However, the moment he puts them on, the gangster's ghost possesses him and uses his body to try and kill his assassins. He fails and dies, but another homeless man finds the shoes, starting the circle all over again. Two Twilight Zone remakes use this type of story, paying homage to it in their title. In 1985, we have Dead Woman's Shoes, with the same premise, except a thrift shop lady wears the shoes of a woman murdered by her husband. The ghost wants revenge, of course, and ultimately gets it when, though the thrift shop lady runs off, a maid from a nearby house finds the shoes and kills the husband. So far, reasonably similar, but the 2002 version, called Dead Man's Eyes, has a woman wear her dead husband's glasses, and instead of getting possessed, she can see his final moments through his glasses. The woman keeps watching to find out who his killer was, and eventually finds out that she was his murderer, because he was cheating on her with her best friend.
There are a lot of episodes that have smaller homages to the old series, of course, but they're not all remakes. In fact, from what I know, there's only about 5 that commonly get remade. One of them is the only ever made Christmas episode for the Twilight Zone. The other is one of my least favorite, or my second least favorite, and another one is actually my favorite that wasn't remade very well, unfortunately. They changed both too much and too little to make it hit home like the original.
The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, 1959. It's aliens again, of course, but this episode is mainly one that displays the insanity of human distrust. Enter Maple Street, USA. It seems a calm enough street just like any other, except on this particular day, a shadow passes over the street, and all the power is shut off. Cars won't start, lights don't turn on, phones are dead. What happened? I just told you that it's aliens. Now, that sounds ridiculous, right? Of course. But this street needs a reason everything is going wrong. So they'll find one. Or else. In this case, a young boy tells them that he read in his comic book that this is how the alien invasion starts. He says that before the invasion begins, the aliens would plant scouts among the people of Earth. They'd look like normal people, live like a normal family, but they'd be aliens, secretly. The street people dismiss the story at first, but when one man's car suddenly starts all on its own, they all become suspicious. Why did this man's car start when no one else's did? Of course, he's an alien. Everyone starts talking about how the man has always been strange, how sometimes he's up late at night, staring at the stars, and how the man should be investigated. But the man only notes that he's been living here for 5 years, and the staring at the sky thing is just insomnia. Things only get worse from there, of course. Neighbors keeping watch on one another, questioning perfectly normal behavior as if it's suddenly abnormal, accusing almost every person in the street of being an alien at one point or another. One man, Steve, the rational one, warns that looking for a scapegoat isn't the answer. And as he's holding his speech, a man approaches from the other end of the street. He's shot by one of them, shouting that the approaching man is an alien. Except it was just one of their neighbors who had gone off to check on nearby streets to see if they had the same problems. The shooter is now under suspicion, of course, and the mob starts to attack him until the man yells that it was the young boy from the start who even knew about the aliens. It must be him. So the mob turns on a child. The street finally erupts in all-out panic as everyone arms themselves to fight one another, suspecting everyone of being aliens. In the end, it was aliens, as I said, but there weren't any in the street. They were on a hilltop, messing with the power. They note how it's very easy to cause this sort of panic in Earthlings, and that this is how they'll conquer Earth. They'll let them fight each other.
And isn't that how it always goes? Every single war on Earth, every conflict, it's always an us versus them because we're scared. We're scared of one another, scared of what we don't understand. If we're in trouble ourselves, if we can't direct our fear, we find a scapegoat, someone to direct that fear onto, to project it onto them. Because once we've made a target of flesh and blood, we can kill it, right? We finally have a target, so we don't have to look at ourselves and figure out where the fear comes from. There's usually scared little people with very big fears. As long as they have a scapegoat, they're safe, because they don't have to think to themselves that perhaps it's in their own head. And maybe they're a fool. Nobody wants to admit that.
In contrast, we have the 2003 version. I don't really like this version, I have to say. The basic premise is the same. However, because it's 2003 and the fear of the World Trade Center attack was still fresh in our minds, it isn't aliens this time. It's terrorists. And everyone isn't fighting everyone else either. They're just attacking a single house because it kind of sort of looks like it might be suspicious because they have power. Everyone cheers as they set their house on fire. It's a very us versus them mentality type episode. In that sense, it's good. Except that I don't think the screw this house in particular metaphor really works. The way Serling wrote his episodes, he always had something of a message. I already talked about the 1959 version's message, of course, but what is the 2003 version's message? Setting house on fire bad? We don't ever see the people in the house, so is it again just the irrational fear angle? And if so, wouldn't it have worked so much better if the us versus them wasn't just focused on a single house? If the message is the terrorism mania is getting out of hand, then why censor yourself? Serling made this show because he was tired of censoring himself. Make the family a Muslim family. Show us that they're not terrorists, but the street only sees what they want to see, because that family is their scapegoat. Except that wouldn't really work here either, because as it turns out, this entire "the power is out" setting was created by the military, who was trying to figure out how a random American street would react to a terrorist threat. So the message is, what again? Military bad, American streets bad, terrorists ? Burn more houses? Anyway, yeah, the 1959 version is definitely my favorite here.
And speaking of favorites, while I do very much enjoy the 1959 version, the originals of course, after 5 seasons, it starts to get a little predictable, unfortunately. Yes, even Rod Serling got predictable. I could tell at the start of most episodes whether or not it was going to be it's actually aliens, they were dead the whole time, it was the robots, etc. kind of trope. So, well, after 5 seasons, I guess they had to end it somewhere. But then the remakes came, and they didn't last nearly as long as the original. So why is that?
The 1985 series was the longest running one of the bunch. CBS really only remade the show because it was cheaper to do so than buying a whole new show otherwise. It wasn't nearly as popular as the 1959 version, but when I asked on Twitter what people thought of when I mentioned Twilight Zone, I did get a lot of New Year's Eve answers too. I didn't prod, but I wonder how many of those answers were from people watching the 1985 version over the 1959 series. As said, the 1985 version was the one I knew best. This series actually used a completely different format from the other Twilight Zones. Each episode would generally include 2 or 3 shorter stories instead of only a single one. Some of those stories were truly short stories of maybe 6 minutes long. The first season wasn't received very well, which led to the next season being moved to the dreaded Saturday night slot. Halfway through the season, they even dropped their original format and just aired singular half-hour stories. Changing course isn't that abnormal. After all, the original 1959 series decided to do 1-hour-long episodes for a single season. But this particular change came after the show had taken a break, too. This, along with production issues, led to the cancellation mid-season 2. One of the writers also complained about studio interference ruining many of the scripts he wrote, which, when you think about it, is probably the worst way to honor Serling's memory. The man who started the Twilight Zone to get away from studio and sponsor meddling. Regardless, there was still a season 3, somehow, except it was produced for a different broadcaster.
It's odd that the 1985 one really didn't do as well as the original. I understand, obviously, that the original will always be the best version for a lot of people, but it's not like the 1985 one didn't have any really good episodes. And studio interference it may be, they still got a few reasonably controversial things past the censors.
In one of the episodes, Little Boy Lost, a woman is presented with her possible future child. However, she can only have this child if she gives up her dream career. In most shows, you'd probably think that the woman will choose the child. It's made clear that she loves the child dearly, and this is a very difficult decision to make. And especially in 1985, it was still rather common to choose kids over careers. But not in this one. The woman chooses the career, literally willing the child out of existence by her doing so. Even further, in Dead Run, a man is tasked with driving the souls of the damned to hell. Halfway through the episode, however, he discovers that no one's really checking if the souls even belong in hell. They're just trying to meet a quota. So, to help the lost souls, every day on his drive to and from hell, he checks his cargo. He asks why they think they belong in hell. One of them, a gay man, doesn't think he belongs in hell just for being gay, and the truck driver agrees and sends him off to heaven. The LGBTQ+ movement wasn't where it is today back in 1985, and to put this out there so publicly was a pretty big deal. But they weren't all this deep, of course. Some of them were lighthearted fun. One of them is my favorite episode, actually, Welcome to Winfield. I like it because it's happy. I'm not going to spoil this one for you, so if you'd like to see something lighthearted, go watch Welcome to Winfield. Another fun one is Button Button. This episode is actually where the famous conundrum comes from. A poor couple is given a box by a mysterious stranger. He tells them that if they press the button, someone will die, someone they don't know. In return, the couple gets $200,000. They think about it for a whole episode until the wife eventually pushes it a single time. The man comes back, hands her the money, and assures her that the button would move on to someone else. Someone they don't know.
Now, the 2002 series that ran into the 2003, I didn't really like as much. I kind of hated it. It's definitely my least favorite season. They were kind of all over the place with this one, and, well, it showed. This particular remake only got a single season. It was a pretty long season, though, so I guess they've got that going for them.
You're traveling to another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are only that of the imagination. You're entering the Twilight Zone.
This one has all of the classic 2000s branding. The absolutely terrible intro, the smash mouth music, fear of rap and rock music. I'm sure I would have loved that when I was 12, my actual age in 2002, but oh man, it did not age well. It does get points for the episode Sensuous Cindy, though. Just putting gay romance on the screen like that was still bold enough to earn a good job from me. Unfortunately, for most of the show, they just go a little too cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. The episode Evergreen sees a family willingly turning their daughter into fertilizer because she was being rebellious. Cradle of Darkness has the what if I could kill baby Hitler premise, terrible German accents included. The pool guy is just incredibly cruel and unusual. The Lineman is a random episode in the middle of the season that just decides to last 40 minutes when, trust me, that episode did not deserve 40 minutes. Harsh Mistress is about a sentient guitar that stands around menacingly and then strangles a woman. It's Still a Good Life doesn't really know what it wants its story to be. The Collection has menacing Barbie dolls. The twist in this one is quite decent, but I'm not going to put you through the effort watching it. A little girl keeps turning her babysitters into Barbie dolls because she doesn't want them to leave. So the Barbie dolls rebel to try and warn the new babysitter, but they fail and she turns into a doll as well. The dolls are just... man, they are not menacing. They're just not. Anyway, the show did terribly, and so it only lasted a season. I'm not really surprised. The only episode I really liked was One Night at Mercy, in which Death wants to take a break, but a doctor realizes that without Death, people would just suffer endlessly from horrible wounds without ever dying. I really don't know what the general message was with most of these episodes. There wasn't really an overlapping 2002 feeling, outside of the terrible designs, I suppose. Maybe that's the problem they were trying to warn us about. My passion is graphic design?
Well, isn't that a positive note? The 2019 one actually is still in production right now. Yes, there's already seasons out, but apparently they're still making new ones right now for 2020. Although I can't really tell you whether that's still a go with everything going on. I actually really like the 2019 remake. For me, they did pretty much everything right. Sure, there's a few things that perhaps were a little bit overproduced, and there is that one episode at the end of season 1 where they made a digital Rod Serling. But we can ignore that for the most part, so that's okay. The 2019 series isn't afraid to talk about the hard-hitting topics, you know, the stuff that Rod Serling loved to talk about himself. And it still has its own sci-fi or magical twist, of course, in true Twilight Zone style.
I'm glad to see aliens make a prominent return in this one, honestly. Maybe that's what the 2002 one missed. Aliens. Because this is the most recent one, you'll likely start to recognize more current-day actors, too. The Twilight Zone always had a very large cast. Very rarely did you see the same actor twice in the series, with some exceptions, of course. William Shatner appears in 2 episodes of the 1959 series, for example. Bruce Willis and Morgan Freeman appear in 1985. And did you know George R.R. Martin wrote several episodes for the show, too? 2002, as short as it ran, did have some big names, too. Like Jason Bateman and, well, maybe ex-big name Jessica Simpson. 2019 already has a pretty good cast with so few episodes. Stephen Yeun, John Cho, Jennifer Goodwin, Seth Rogen, Marina Baccarin, Joel McHale. A lot, just a lot. I don't think I need to tell you what the pressing topics for 2019 are, though. If you've never watched a Twilight Zone episode and you think the older shows might turn you off on the idea, try the 2019 version. It talks about everything we care about in this era, just like the 1959 originals did. The episode Rewind deals with racism in a very raw way. It follows a young black woman and her son on their way to a new school. They're excited, they're happy. Enter a cop. I'm not going to tell you more. Watch the episode. And don't worry, this one has a happy ending, although it comes with a warning. The episode The Wunderkind touches on the Trump presidency. And yes, it follows a child who becomes an internet sensation and through that makes his way to becoming President of the United States of America. The message being that no, maybe it isn't a great idea to let just about any oaf with a big mouth run for president, especially the current oaf. Episode 7, Not All Men, is about, well, I think you can probably guess. It's about men and how they're perceived by women, the fear they can cause and why yelling, "Not all men," is the least productive thing you can do. I'm not spoiling this one for you either. I really want you to watch the 2019 Twilight Zone. Because it's present day, I didn't talk about all of the episodes, but yeah, I actually rather enjoyed all of them. Save for one weird one where an octopus basically becomes Aquaman, I guess. The only real problem I have with this show is actually the end of season 1. They made a computer-generated Serling. Hey, showrunners, if you don't have the budget for good CGI, don't use CGI. Just don't do it. One thing I would like to note, however, is that I'd appreciate more light-hearted episodes. The Twilight Zone isn't meant to only ever be words of warning. Some episodes were just fun for the sake of fun. Also, this one episode where everyone is named Jeff just cracks me up because they didn't account for the memes.
The Twilight Zone will hopefully, for many generations to come, still be a window into the future. Things that writers can come up with that may or may not come true for us. And also, a window into the past. What was in our mind back then? What were our problems, our greatest fears, our hopes, our dreams? What did we think the future was going to be like? I can tell you right now that at the very least, we definitely lost a few words from our vocabulary since then. Trust me, it's probably for the best.
1959 taught us to be careful what you wish for, and I suppose not to build bomb shelters if you don't plan to invite the whole town. 1985 taught us that maybe there's more to life than our jobs and surface-level beauty. And also that men in their 30s sometimes go through an extremely violent midlife crisis. The 2019 version is still trying to drill some pretty basic human decency lessons into our heads that somehow we've been ignoring all these years. Racism was a theme in the 1959 version, and it still is now. Perhaps it's time to wake up and realize that there's a problem. The 2002 series taught us that maybe we shouldn't all take up graphic design, because for some it should remain a hobby instead of a career. The Twilight Zone allowed any story of any kind to be told. There were no limits. If you can dream it, you can write it. And I will always love Rod Serling for that. He's also a very charming man, at least from the interviews I've watched of him, and his voice is like molten butter, but the good butter, you know, not the cheap stuff. The best, richest, smoothest butter in the world.
And that, for now, is all I have to say about the Twilight Zone. If you've never actually watched the Twilight Zone yourself, have I piqued your interest? Are you going to watch? And if you have watched it, any favorite episodes? I'd love to hear from you. And if you aren't still never going to watch it, then let me at least give you this piece of advice directly from the Twilight Zone. Get a dog and listen to the dog, especially when it comes to death. Va fail. An ordinary day for three ordinary friends. Wolguy, Septic, and MJS Coolstar take the same route to the same village. They arrive at a different place each time. In one village, the murder of one Robertson S.O. The circumstances? Suspect at best. In another, the fable of Lochmuin has spread through every village on the countryside. But what does it mean? And where does it go? The third, Adrian Peckle. Inventor, genius, madman? Only one way to find out. Only one man occurs in every single village. One man, Mike Sveers. Is he a part of each town? Or is he a part of the Twilight Zone?